Oh my goodness gracious, I look good today. I look so good. Man, I got a tie on and everything. Man, must be time for history. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started on today's lesson. We're going to kind of be reviewing a little bit of what we've talked about as far as early American history so far today. You'll watch a short video, you'll do a song analysis, and that'll be our work for today and tomorrow, I guess. All right, let's go ahead and get started, see what we got here. All right. So American history starts with colonies. The British were making colonies in America. We had the original 13 colonies right up here. I know there's actually more than 13. That's because Vermont and Maine were considered part of Massachusetts at the time, but whatever. The English saw these colonies as a way to get natural resources and a way to get markets for their products. So they could sell whatever they made in England here in America and make money off of it. The first successful English settlement that we had was called Jamestown. And Jamestown is right here right here in Virginia. And in 1607, it was established. They grew tobacco. They had some issues with the Native Americans at first, but more or less the Native Americans helped them and were able to get them to survive and be successful. All right. Now, that being said, that is the first successful English colony in America, was called Jamestown. It wasn't the first colony. And in fact, we're going to talk about another colony right now, early colony, in fact, one of the first colonies we had, and it was called Roanoke. Now, Roanoke is actually an island right off the coast of North Carolina. And let's talk a little bit about that one, because I feel that that settlement actually has a much more interesting story than Jamestown. All right, in the 1500s, this is pretty early on in American history, the British tried one of their very, very first colonies in this place called Roanoke. They set up a military base there in Roanoke, and more or less this military base got attacked by the Native Americans, and the British had to abandon it. So, more or less their military was murdered by the Native Americans, and they went away. The British tried again in 1585. Hey, if you don't succeed once, try again. Or as my favorite saying goes, if at first you don't succeed, don't try skydiving. But that being said, the British do try again in 1585. And again, they set up a military base. And again, they are attacked by the Native Americans. And again, they have to leave their base once everyone is kind of murdered. So the British try a third time. Why? I don't know. Why would you try and make a third colony after the first two were murdered by the Native Americans? I don't know. But they did try a third colony. This colony was different, though. Instead of sending military people, they sent civilians. They sent men and women who were going to make babies and start a colony that way. Not a military colony, like a social colony, like where people were going to make their new lives. This attempt was in 1587. More or less what happened is they dropped the colonists off. The ship dropped them off. The ship went back to England. 3 years later, that ship finally came back to Roanoke to see if those colonists were still there. And quite honestly, they probably expected them to be dead. But as they start to approach the shore, they start to see buildings. And so the people on the boat were like, oh, I guess those people in Roanoke, they survived. They made buildings. But as they got on shore, they realized these buildings were abandoned. They were overgrown with weeds. There were things left on tables. There were farm implements left in the field. Like these people had just got sucked up out of nowhere. There was no evidence of a struggle, nothing. There were 2 words carved into a tree. One of them was Croatan. And that was it. And it's a mystery. And people for the last 100 years have been trying to figure it out. What happened at Roanoke? Was it aliens or whatever? Well, within the last 20 years, 30 years or so, we've started to get some maybe pretty good ideas about what happened. So you're going to watch this video. It will be an assignment on Google Classroom. Go ahead, pause this video right now. Go watch that one on Google Classroom, fill out the guided notes, and find out what happened to the colony at Roanoke. Don't worry, I'll wait for you here. Go ahead, do that now. I'll wait. Go, do it. Okay. All right. Hopefully you're back now. I'm hoping. All right. So let's go ahead and continue on with this lecture today. Let's talk a little bit more about early American history, what America looked like before we were actually a country. So in the early 1700s, so this is a little bit after Roanoke, right? Roanoke was in the 1500s. You got Jamestown in the 1600s. Now, the early 1700s, this is kind of what America's looking like. There are three nations that have colonial claims. We have New Spain, led by King Charles III. Let's take a closer look at King Charles. Oh God, no, put that away. And guys, that is why you don't marry your cousin. Please, just don't. It doesn't turn out pretty. But anyway, King Charles, he gets New Spain, they get Florida, they get what is now Mexico. And in 1769, King Charles doesn't even know this yet, but in 1769, he's going to get that whole area right there. So he's going to get a lot more territory. I'm sure he'll be pretty stoked about that. No cap at all, Charles III, that's all yours. Now, the next territory we want to look at is New France. And that's going to be led by the French, obviously, and their king, Louis XVI. Now, Louis XVI, he gets a big portion of America in the early 1700s, so he looks pretty happy. Of course, he doesn't know that his own people are going to kill him in 1789 during the French Revolution and cut his head off. Yeah, less happy. And then the last country that has colonies in America in the 1700s, obviously, is Great Britain. They get the smallest territory over there. So the British king, his name is King George III. He's not all that impressed. He comes over, from Britain. It's like, oh, awesome. Wow, look at all that land. But it is important land because they have so many ports that they can ship things between Europe and America. So those are the three countries that are kind of vying for territory in the 1700s. And in the 1750s, there's going to be a war. And we call this the 7 Years' War. And Great Britain, they will win the 7 Years' War. They will get a lot of territory out of it, which is why we're a British country and not a French or a Spanish country. That's why we speak English. They win the 7 Years' War, but it costs them a lot of money to do it. So the British government needs to make up that money. The way they do that is the British government says, let's start taxing the Americans. These American colonists, hey, let's make them pay for our wars. So they passed something called the Stamp Act in 1765. Every piece of paper, every playing card, every kind of document is going to have a tax on it that you have to pay to Britain to help them pay for the wars that they had. The Americans are not very happy about this, and they start to feel really terrible about the British. They feel that they are being taxed without representation. The king is coming in and saying you have to pay taxes, and the American colonists, they don't have any say in the matter. This comes to a head in 1770. There's a Boston Massacre. These colonists in Boston, they start getting into it with these British soldiers. There's actually a 13-year-old wig maker who starts causing trouble. He goes up to one of the British soldiers and it's like, hey, you didn't pay for your wig. Different times, man. Different times. But anyway, you didn't pay for your wig. It starts a whole argument. The whole area gets involved, and it culminates with the British actually starting to shoot at the Americans. This went through all the newspapers at the time. The Americans are pissed about it. They can't believe that the British would murder them like this in a freaking massacre. Massacre where how many people died? It must have been a bloodshed. There were a total of five. Just five? Oh, 5 people. Okay. I think it's interesting we called it the Boston Massacre when 5 people died. Again, I'm not saying that's not a tragedy. Obviously, 5 people dying isn't good. But massacre? Right? Like think about the things that have happened in your lifetime, right? Think about we having protests over police killings of Black people. A lot more than just 5 Black people, right? But that's kind of how things have changed over time. I think that's kind of interesting. But back then, that was considered a massacre. So, the American colonists, we are pissed at the British. There's actually a musical called Hamilton you might have heard about, and I'm a big fan of it. It's all about the American Revolution. But they have this one part in one song, and the song is called My Shot, where it really talks about how upset the American colonists were at the British, how they felt about it. So in this one, it's Alexander Hamilton, and he's going to be talking about why the colonists are upset at the British, why the colonists feel that they should have a revolution. So let's listen to this quick little clip here.
A colony that runs independently. Meanwhile, Britain keeps shitting on us endlessly. Essentially, they tax us relentlessly. Then King George turns around, runs a spending spree. He ain't never gonna set his descendants free. So there will be a revolution in this century.
He says in parentheses. Oh, I guess we're done. All right. I like that song, whatever. But he makes a really good point. the colonists felt that they were a colony that was supposed to run independently. They were across the ocean from Britain. We're supposed to be doing things our own way. We should have a say. Meanwhile, Britain keeps shitting on us endlessly. They tax us relentlessly. And then King George turns around and runs a spending spree, right? He's spending all the money on the 7 Years' War, and that's why he's taxing us. He ain't never going to set his descendants free. And that's our founding fathers, right? They thought of themselves as British, not as Americans, not yet. The colonists still thought of themselves as British. So they were like, we're the descendants of the British. Why are you treating us like crap? You should be treating us as well as other British people. And then he goes on, so there will be a revolution in century. So if you ever have a chance, watch Hamilton. It's on Disney Plus if you get that. It's actually pretty good, and it does a good job of talking about early American history. Anyway, so we're upset. The Americans are upset. We're upset about the taxes. We're upset about the Boston Massacre. And so in 1773, one of the things the colonists do is they get involved in something called the Boston Tea Party. Now, this group of people called the Sons of Liberty, they get on this boat in Boston Harbor. They dress up like Native Americans. I don't know why they do that. Pretty racist if you ask me. But it doesn't really matter. They get up, they dress up as Native Americans, and they throw the tea off the ship. And this is their protest, right? If you're going to tax us, we're going to destroy your property. Maybe we can't violently hurt you, right? Like we can't overthrow you. We can't kill you because you have a bigger army, but we can destroy your property and show you that we're pissed off. Now, this actually kind of reminds me, I love to talk in this class about modern issues. It reminds me of the George Floyd protests today. There are Black people and people of color, and actually white people too, right? All people out there who are protesting against how their perceived treatment of Black people by the police. And I got into an argument with my parents about this because my parents are like, well, people shouldn't be protesting. They shouldn't be looting and rioting. That's wrong. And don't get me wrong. I understand their point of view. They think rioting is wrong. They think protesting is bad. They think violence is bad in any form. I get that. But at the same time, isn't that kind of how our country was formed? Wasn't the Boston Tea Party a riot? Didn't they destroy property? Now, my parents would say it was different, right? Because the Boston Tea Party, they didn't loot. That's one of the things that's happening today is people will go into these stores, not so much anymore, but especially when the protests were starting, they break into these stores and take stuff, right? And my parents are like, well, it's different. At the Boston Tea Party, they didn't steal the tea, which might be true. At least that's what the Sons of Liberty, that's what the Sons of Liberty told us. They said that they didn't steal any. In fact, they told us that they caught one guy trying to steal and they punished him. Maybe that's true. Or maybe they're just trying to make themselves look good. Do I really believe that none of them right then took like a handful of tea and put it in their pocket real quick? Do I think that would have been noticed or that anyone would have cared? So was there actually looting the Boston Tea Party? I don't know. The Sons of Liberty say no, but again, the evidence isn't really strong one way or another. So have an opinion yourself. Do you think the Boston Tea Party is kind of like the protests we're having today? Or do you think they're totally different and that the protests that are today are nothing like the Boston Tea Party? Make up your own mind. I'm going to ask you that in our guided notes. So in response to the Boston Tea Party, what the British do to us is they pass what are called the Intolerable Acts, right? And this is kind of how this whole thing goes, right? We get upset at the taxes. We start causing stuff with the British. They do the Boston Massacre. We do the Boston Tea Party. Now they're going to do the Intolerable Acts. Again, it's just going back and forth. We're just responding to each other. The Intolerable Acts were the result of the Boston Tea Party, and these acts were meant to punish the colonists. What they did is they closed Boston Harbor. They took away the Massachusetts self-legislators, so they couldn't govern themselves anymore. They had to totally do what the British said. They had absolutely no say at all. And they extended the province of Quebec. In response, the colonists kind of got together. They made a communication network. They started arguing with each other that, hey, only we should be able to have taxes. We shouldn't have to listen to the British. And here is exactly what happens. So, like I said, the British suspend the Massachusetts Assembly. That was part of the Intolerable Acts, right? And that was on the second one, right? They took the taking of the Massachusetts self-government. So they took away Massachusetts' right to have a government. So again, the response, this is all call and response, the response by the Americans is to make their own assembly. The British say, hey, you can't have an assembly, you can't make your own laws, you can't govern yourselves. The Massachusetts people say, you know what? We're going to meet in secret, we're going to make our own assembly. And they hire a guy, I'm not hire, but they name John Hancock as the president of this new assembly in Massachusetts. And more or less what they're doing is they're making him a governor of Massachusetts. That's what the colonists did. But the problem was there already was a governor. There was a British governor. And so now we have these two forces, right? Again, responses. The British take away our ability to have an assembly. We come back, we make our own assembly. We name John Hancock as the president of the assembly, make him a governor more or less, and give him the power to call up a militia, an army, if you will. The British hear that and they're like, shoot, okay, fine. You have the power to call up an army. Well, we're going to go in and we're going to take your army's guns. So even if you call up your army, hey, they have no guns. So the British decide to confiscate the militia's guns in Concord. That's the city. However, on the way to Concord, there's another city called Lexington, and that's where the American militia was, and they already had their guns. So they start shooting at the British, and that is the beginning of the American Revolution. That's our first fight, is at Lexington and Concord, because the British were coming to take our arms, and we're like, nope, that's not happening. You can have our guns over our cold, dead bodies. All right, now that's the beginning of the American Revolution. We're not going to get into so much of the battles. Just trust me, we won. Yeah, we totally won the revolution. But I did want to talk about one more thing before we move on for today. I want to talk about King George, the King of England at the time. Now, King George kind of gets a bad rap in American history. One of the reasons that he gets a bad rap is because after the American Revolution, he goes mad. He has mental illness. He cannot even be king anymore because his mental illness is so bad. However, even despite that, this guy right here, actually a decent leader. Actually a pretty decent leader. Even once he had madness. A lot of the people in Britain wished he was still around, even when he wasn't around anymore, because he could have a calming effect on people. He listened to people. He actually was pretty smart, intelligent, well-reasoned. He was trying to make the best decisions for his country and even for America. I mean, hindsight's 2020. Yes, he lost the colonies. We had a revolution. Granted, it looks like his whole idea on taxes wasn't a great idea, but he had to pay for the war somehow, right? He wasn't being a crazy person, although he totally became a crazy person. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about King George. Now, this is how his madness kind of showed. This is what his wife said about his madness. King George often spoke till he was exhausted, and the moment he could recover his breath began again, while the foam ran out of his mouth. And that's kind of what you're seeing over here. Jonathan Groff is funny. Anyway, that's not what King George looked like, but whatever. At the time, for the longest time, for hundreds of years, historians thought that King George had a blood disease called porphyria. Within the last few years, we found out that that's probably not the case. He probably didn't have a blood disease that made him go crazy. He probably just had mental illness. The dude was probably bipolar, or at the very least had one part of bipolarism. Is that what you call it? Having a bipolar personality means that sometimes you're manic, which means you talk all the time. You can be the life of the party. You use very complicated language, very verbose. In fact, sometimes you can sound very intelligent. You just can keep talking on a whim and keep going, kind of like I'm doing right now. And then on the other hand, the other part of bipolar is sometimes you're like that. The other times you're super depressed. And you don't really talk too much. You don't make eye contact with people. You know, depression isn't always about feeling bad. Sometimes it's like being quiet and introspective. Like that. Now, was he actually bipolar? We don't know. But he certainly had some manic episodes. And clearly that became a big problem for him. I do briefly want to talk to you about mental illness. We're all going to have it at some point, right? We're all going to have something. We're all going to have depression, mania, maybe OCD a little bit. Maybe there's something we need to be super organized about, a pet peeve that really bothers us. It's okay. It's okay to have mental illness. It's okay to talk to someone about it. It's okay to get help. It's okay to talk to your counselors. It's okay to talk to your teachers about it, because we all are going to have it to some degree. Some of us have it really bad like King George, or like really bad like King George. And most of us, it's a little bit more moderate, right? It's just little issues we have sometimes. I get manic. I'm a little manic right now. It's why I'm talking very well and I'm not making a whole lot of mistakes when I speak. I'm not saying all the time. You might notice that in some of my other videos, I say a lot. When I'm manic, I don't have that problem, right? I can speak much more clearly. And again, it's not, oh, I just did it, but it's not so much a problem. Anyway, so moving on. Now I'm doing it because now I'm thinking about saying all the time. Anyway, moving on. It's okay to talk to people about these things. All right. The very last thing we have for today is you're going to do a song analysis. This song analysis is on Google Classroom, and it's from the musical Hamilton, just like that song we did before. So that's another one you'll do on Google Classroom. I was going to have you do a quiz today, but I think I'm going to move that till tomorrow because we have a few activities to do. All right, so that's what I have for you today. Make sure that you filled out your guided notes, turn them in, and 20 minutes. Oh, that's longer than I thought it'd be. Okay, I'm going to quit right now then. 21 minutes is the end of my lecture. That's as long as I'm going to try and keep them. All right, I will see you guys later. Do your assignments on Google Classroom. Have a wonderful day. Take it easy.